It was Owain, mighty Owain, king's champion and the greatest fighter in all Britain. We had thought Owain was far to the north, fighting alongside the men of Gwent in the mountains of Powys. Yet here he was, at Caer-Cadern. Yet, in sober truth, Gunlius still held the advantage. We were 12 horsemen, 50 spearmen, and 30 tired fugitives, who were gathered in an open place where Gunlius had gathered almost twice as many horsemen and twice as many spearmen. The sun was still bright. It would be 2 hours before twilight, and 4 before it was full dark, and that gave Gunlius more than enough time to finish his slaughter, though first he tried to persuade us with words. He rode forward, splendid on his sweat-foamed horse, and with his shield held upside down as a sign of truce. "Men of Dumnonia," he called, "give me the child, and I will go." No one answered. Owain had hidden himself in the centre of our shield wall, so that Gunlius, seeing no leader, addressed us all. "It's a maimed child," the Silurian king called. "Cursed by the gods! You think any good fortune can attend a country ruled by a crippled king? You want your harvests blighted? You want your children born sick? You want your cattle to die of a murrain? You want the Saxons to be lords of this land? What else does a crippled king bring but ill fortune?" Still no one answered, though God knows enough men in our hastily aligned ranks must have feared that Gunlius spoke the truth. The Silurian king lifted the helmet from his long hair and smiled at our plight. "You may all live," he promised, "so long as you give me the child." He waited for an answer that did not come. "Who leads you?" he finally asked. "I do." Owain at last pushed through the ranks to take his place in front of our shield line. "Owain?" Gunlius recognized him, and I thought I saw a flicker of fear in Gunlius's eyes. Like us, he had not known that Owain had returned to the heart of Dumnonia. Yet Gunlius was still confident of victory, even though he must have known that with Owain among his enemies, that victory would be much harder. "Lord Owain," Gunlius said, giving Dumnonia's champion his proper title, "son of Eilinon, and grandson of Kulwas, I salute you." Gunlius raised his spear-tip towards the sun. "You have a son, Lord Owain." "Many men have sons," Owain answered carelessly. "What's it to you?" "Do you want your boy to be fatherless?" Gunlius asked. "Do you want your lands wasted, your home burned? Do you want your wife to be my men's plaything?" "My wife," Owain said, "could outfight all your men, and you too. You want playthings, Gunlius? Go back to your whore." He jerked his chin towards Ladwis. "And if you won't share your whore with your men, then Dumnonia can spare Siluria a few lonely ewes." Owain's defiance cheered us. He looked indomitable with his massive spear, long sword, and iron-plated shield. He always fought bareheaded, disdaining a helmet, and his hugely muscled arms were tattooed with Dumnonia's dragon, and his own symbol of a long-tusked boar. "Yield me the child." Gunlius ignored the insults, knowing they were merely the defiance expected of a man facing battle. "Give me the crippled king." "Give me your whore, Gunlius," Owain retorted. "You're not man enough for her. Give her to me, and you can go in peace." Gunlius spat. "The bards will sing of your death, Owain. The song of the pig-sticking." Owain thrust his huge spear butt first into the soil. "Here the pig stands, Gunlius ap Myliel, king of Siluria," he shouted. "And here the pig will either die or piss on your corpse. Now go." Gunlius smiled, shrugged, and turned his horse away. He also turned his shield the right side up, letting us know that we would have a fight. It was my first battle. The Domnonian horsemen formed behind our line of spears to protect the women and children so long as they could. The rest of us arrayed ourselves in the battle line and watched as our enemies did the same. Ligesak, the traitor, was among the Silurian ranks. Tanabers performed the rites, hopping on one leg and with one hand raised and one eye closed in front of Gunlius's shield wall as it advanced slowly across the grassland. Only when Tanabers had cast his protective spell did the Silurians begin to shout insults at us. They warned us of the massacre to come, and boasted how many of us they would kill. Yet even so, I noticed how slowly they came, and, when they were only 50 paces away, how they stopped altogether. Some of our men jeered at their timidity, but Owain growled at us to be silent. The battle lines stared at each other. Neither moved. It takes extraordinary courage to charge into a line of shields and spears. That is why so many men drink before the fight. I've seen armies pause for hours while they summon the courage to charge, and the older the warrior, the more courage is needed. Young troops will charge and die, but older men know how terrible an enemy shield wall can be. I had no shield, yet I was covered by the shields of my neighbours, and their shields touched others, and so on down our small line, so that any man charging home would be met by a wall of leather-covered wood, bristling with razor-sharp spears. The Silurians began beating their shields with their spear-staffs. The rattling sound was meant to unsettle us, and it did, though none on our side showed the fear. We just huddled together, waiting for the charge. "There'll be some false charges first, lad," my neighbour warned me. And no sooner had he spoken than a group of Silurians ran screaming from their line and hurled their long spears at the centre of our defence. Our men crouched, and the long spears banged home into our shields, and suddenly the whole Silurian line was moving forward. But Owain immediately ordered our line to stand and march forward too, and that deliberate motion checked the enemy's threatened attack. Those of our men whose shields were cumbered with the enemy's spears wrenched the weapons loose, then made the shield wall whole again. "Edge back!" Owain ordered us. He would try to shuffle slowly backwards across the half-mile of grassland to Caer Cadern, hoping that the Silurians would not raise the courage to make their charge while we completed that pitifully slow journey. To give us more time, Owain strode ahead of our line and shouted at Gunlius to fight him man to man. "Are you a woman, Gunlius?" our king's champion called. "Lost your courage? Not enough mead? Why don't you go back to your weaving loom, woman? Go back to your embroidery. Go back to your spindle." We shuffled back, shuffled back, shuffled back. But suddenly a charge of the enemy made us stand firm and duck behind our shields as the spears were hurled. One whipped over my head, its passage sounding like a sudden rush of wind. But again the attack was a feint, intended to panic us. Ligesak was firing arrows, but he must have been drunk, for his shots went wildly overhead. Owain was a target for a dozen spears, but most missed, and the others he swept contemptuously aside with spear or shield before mocking the throwers. "Who taught you spearcraft? Your mothers?" He spat towards the enemy. "Come, Gunlius! Fight me! Show your scullions you're a king, not a mouse!" The Silurians beat spear shafts on their shields to drown Owain's taunts. He turned his back to show them his scorn, and walked slowly back to our shield line. "Back!" he called to us softly. "Back!" Then two of the Silurians threw down their shields and weapons, and tore off their clothes to fight naked. My neighbour spat. "There'll be trouble now," he warned me grimly. The naked men were probably drunk, or else so intoxicated by the gods that they believed no enemy blade could hurt them. I had heard of such men, and knew that their suicidal example was usually the signal for a real attack. I gripped my sword and tried to make a vow to die well, but in truth, I could have wept for the pity of it all. I had become a man this day, and now I would die. I would join Uther and Howl in the other world, and there wait through the shadowed years until my soul found another human body in which to return to this green world. The two men unbound their hair, took up their spears and swords, then danced in front of the Silurian line. They howled as they worked themselves into the battle frenzy, that state of mindless ecstasy that will let a man try any feat. Gunlius, sitting his horse beneath his banner, smiled at the two men whose bodies were intricately tattooed with blue patterns. The children were crying behind us, and our women were calling to the gods as the men danced nearer and nearer, their spears and swords whirling in the evening sun. Such men had no need of shields, clothes, or armor. The gods were their protection, and glory was their reward. And if they succeeded in killing Owain, then the bards would sing of their victory for years to come. They advanced, one on each side of our champion, who hefted his spear as he prepared to meet their frenzied attack, which would also mark the moment when the whole enemy line would charge. And then the horn sounded. The horn gave a clear, cold note like none I had ever heard before. There was a purity to that horn, a chill, hard purity like nothing else on all the earth. It sounded once. It sounded twice, and the second call was enough to give even the naked men pause and make them turn towards the east from where the sound had come. I looked too, and I was dazzled. It was as though a new bright sun had risen on that dying day. The light slashed over the pastures, blinding us, confusing us. But then the light slid on, and I saw it was merely the reflection of the real sun glancing from a shield polished bright as a mirror. But that shield was held by such a man as I had never seen before. A man magnificent, a man lifted high on a great horse and accompanied by other such men. A horde of wondrous men, plumed men, armored men, men sprung from the dreams of the gods to come to this murderous field. And over the men's plumed heads there floated a banner I would come to love more than any banner on all God's earth. It was the banner of the bear. The horn sounded a third time, and suddenly I knew I would live, and I was weeping for joy, and all our spearmen were half crying and half shouting, and the earth was shuddering with the hooves of those godlike men who were riding to our rescue. For Arthur at last had come.